Hello, welcome to The Print Soft Cover, our digital avenue for launching non-fiction books. Today, we have historian and author Manu Bhagavan with us to talk about his recently published book on freedom fighter Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit. Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit, or popularly known as Madame Pandit, was not only a freedom fighter, but was also the 8th President of United Nations General Assembly and was popular for running a campaign against her own niece Indira Gandhi during emergency. Pandit, who wore several caps and led an extraordinary life, was eventually iced off as first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru's sister. This deeply enriching and engaging book has been published by the Penguin, and it attempts to present Pandit in all her complexities. So let me welcome the author. Welcome to The Print, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. My first and foremost question to you is that despite all Pandit's contributions to the freedom struggle and strengthening of nascent India's diplomatic ties, Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit was best known as Nehru's sister. Would you agree that she was never able to escape Nehru's shadow?
During her lifetime, I don't think that's true. It certainly was not really true internationally. And even domestically, I'm not certain I would agree with that characterization, and I'll tell you why. For one thing, Nehru had another sister, Krishna Hati Singh, and Krishna Hati Singh also had, ideas of being a writer and was interested in certain kinds of things, and she did not break out in the same way that her sister did. And so if it was simply the family connection or whatever, I think, you would have seen more from the other side. And then internationally, while it was true that she was Nehru's sister, but in some cases, people often told her, that they wouldn't let against her because some people disagreed with him, and they had great fondness for her, and so she helped sell India's policies and his abroad, and was certainly an asset. So I'm not sure I would totally characterize that when she ran for office in India, in the Pulpur seat, which was his after he passed away. She was insistent that she said, look, don't even think of me as his sister. I insist you think of me on my own terms. That's how she campaigned. So I think she did her part to kind of stand apart. I think that abroad she made things on her own terms. At the same time, being part of the family there were some drawbacks for her because of her connections. That is to say, she had her own ideas and ambitions, and it's not so much that she was overshadowed by Nehru, but because of the connection with her brother, she sometimes wasn't always able to pursue her own interests because of how the family thought it might be perceived, or how he thought it might be perceived, or how she didn't want to step on his toes. So for a variety of reasons, the family issues were there from a different angle.
But my question also emanated from that picture that you had written about, a picture of Gandhi and Nehru. And that picture was tweaked. There was Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit, but in the picture, for the longest time, nobody knew that it was Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit when Nehru and Gandhi. So what do you have to say about that? Was she purposely tweaked from the history or cut off from the history?
Yes. So the picture you're referring to is a famous photograph by Associated Press photographer Max Desfor. And he took a photograph of the All India Congress Committee in the 1940s. It's a very famous photograph. And the one that the world essentially knows is Gandhi and Nehru are leaning into one another and laughing, and it's a very well-known photo. But when you pan out, you realize that Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit was sitting to camera left of Nehru, and so was cut out of this famous photo. And then more recently, including in Desfer's obituary, she was re-included in the original photo. So in this sense, yes, but the reason she's iced out is not so much because she's Nehru's sister. It's more because at multiple levels, she was firstly, as a woman, I think she was marginalized. I think her contributions were minimized. I think male-dominated people in the field of diplomacy and international relations after the fact did not always take what she had done seriously, and again, minimized it at that level, in keeping with the way many women's contributions have been marginalized or minimized. So I think all of those things are part of it. And then ultimately, it also has to do with her clash with Krishna Menon, and her marginalization because of that. And then further, her clash with Indira Gandhi, where she ultimately helped to bring an end to the emergency, Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit. And then Mrs. Gandhi, when she came back to power in 1980, sort of never forgave her aunt and actively kind of had her erased from the public record. So for all these reasons, Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit in the present day's memory, as well as in like records and scholarship after the fact, has been minimized or erased, as I've described it.
I'd read your book, which is like really well researched and deeply engaging, and I wanted to ask you that how you came across Vijay Lakshmi Pandit. Was it during your research assignments, and what was the motivation for writing this book? Because Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, as I got to know her from your work, it was way ahead of her times. A very progressive feminist woman who stood for what she, thought was right.
Right. Well, great question. So it's a funny story. Actually, what happened is several years ago, I was sitting in my office at Hunter College. A colleague came by. He was an Americanist, meaning he studies US history, and he had just published his first major book, and he came into my office and proudly presented it to me and told me that I would be particularly interested in it. And I looked at him kind of quizzically because I was interested in the topic, which was US and world affairs, but I wasn't quite clear why I would be particularly interested in it. And he kind of looked at me back and sort of tapped the book and said, "Well, Madame Pandit." And I looked at him blankly, and he sort of tapped at it again and said, "Madame Pandit." And I just didn't know what he was talking about. I said, "Okay, thank you." And I had to actually look it up, and I said, "Who's that?" "Oh, Vijay Lakshmi Pandit." So again, here's where your first question comes into play. I was like, "Oh, well, that's Nehru's sister." And I didn't know anything else about it. And I was like, I didn't know she was called Madame Pandit, and I didn't know that she was associated with I didn't know anything, actually. And I was very embarrassed because, I'd been in the field for a while. I knew, other than the most basic things, I didn't have anything more to reel off. And so I had to sit with that embarrassment for a little bit. And it can be very helpful if you accept it with a little bit of humility, embarrassment, I mean, to say, look, here's something I think I should know about that I don't know about. So I should open myself up to learning. So I looked into it a bit, and I was pretty surprised to find that there really wasn't basically all that much. My colleague had written this book, An Americanist, where I found more about her in his book than I did in most records of Indian history or South Asian history. So that put me on a journey that led me to her records at Deenmurti, and ultimately that developed into my last book, The Peacemakers. And I was struck by her speeches and her overall strength of character. She really popped out of the page. I was writing it, but she was sort of popping out of the page as I was doing it. So anyway, I finished that and I moved on to something else. And several years passed, and I was sitting in my kitchen one day, a kitchen table, and I just sort of looked up from this project I was working on, and I turned to my partner my wife Shri, and she looked at me like quizzically, and I said, "Well, she guess I'm working on this, but what I really want to do is write a biography of Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, and I would love to do it for Penguin." Now, I don't know why it just sort of it had been in my mind, and I'm not quite clear why I said that, other than it clearly was something I was interested in. And she sort of nodded and sort of nodded sympathetically, and then told me to get back to work. Well, anyway, a few weeks or so passed, and then out of the blue, this is a true story, by the way, out of the blue, Penguin wrote to me and asked me if I would be interested in writing a biography of Vijay Lakshmi Pandit for them. And I just took this as a cosmic sign, because I thought, well, clearly this was meant to be. So I said yes, and here we are.
So let's talk about Vijay Lakshmi Pandit. In your book, you talk about her relationship with Gandhi. Initially it didn't start off well, when Gandhi called her to his ashram, and he criticized her for her first marriage with Sayyid Hosseini. But at that point in time, Pandit writes to her friend Padmaja Naidu saying that Gandhi is a patriarch, right? But over a period of time, she develops a different kind of sympathy for Gandhi. She starts respecting him for his contribution to the freedom movement. So, how do you describe this shift in perception, in Pandit's perception of Gandhi?
Well, you've characterized it very well, actually. She was 19 when she fell in love with, and got married to very rapidly, Syed Hussein, who was a few years older than her and had come to work for her father's newspaper in Allahabad. And then the family disapproved of this and had the marriage annulled very rapidly, and Gandhi intervened and helped to break it apart. So in the context of all of that, but also preceding that, in her early years, she wasn't that enthralled by him. She was much more impressed by Sarojini Naidu and Annie Besant.
Yes.
And their oratory and their skills than she was of him. He seemed kind of quirky and odd to her. So some of it has to do, I think, obviously with his intervention in her personal affairs, and she did not particularly like that. Then ashram living. She was 19 and coming from this incredibly well-off family. Ashram living in Gandhi's Spartan style was very challenging for her. She didn't particularly appreciate that. And so, she clashed with him in these early years. She also clashed with her father a bit in relation to the Syed Hussein marriage. And then, sort of on the other side of this, she meets and gets married to Ranjit Pandit, and they, sort of start enjoying life together and get drawn into the anti-colonial movement. And as a result of some of this, and her, as she sort of begins to grow, she sees different sides to Gandhi. I don't know that she ever totally dismisses some of her earlier criticisms. She maintains that in some ways, he's a little off base in his attitudes towards some interpersonal relations, and particularly to the importance of sexual health, things like this. But she does come to see him as very wise, and she does come to see him as affectionate, and she does come to see the power of his political tactics and his overall political vision, which she does subscribe to. And she comes to it fairly soon after her original impression. So by the 20s, she's drawing closer to him, and by the 30s, I would say that she's wholly in his camp.
What I found very interesting, like through Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, you also showed us like different faces of Gandhi. when he was asking her, when he was trying to break her marriage, he tells her that all Hindus, you couldn't find a man and you've gone with a Muslim. So different faces of Gandhi. It was like really interesting for me as a reader. Again, back to the question that the origins of Nehru family have always been mired in controversy. Those on the right side of the ideological spectrum have always disputed Nehru family's Kashmiri Pandit roots. And the first chapter of your book starts in Kashmir Achabal. So, was there any specific reason for starting the book from Kashmir?
An interesting question. I started the book there because I don't think for the reasons you're asking. There's a famous episode when uh, she's about 15 years old. Uh, I think it's about when she's 15. Um, they're there on a family trip, and um, they're on a picnic, and she's laying in the grass, and she's reading a book, and her father is one side and her mother is on the other side. And all of a sudden, she sort of hears her father say, "Don't move." And there's a cobra kind of with hood out in the open, sort of hovering right above her. And she lays very still, and then whoosh, the cobra sort of darts under her arm and out into the brush. And her mother takes this as a big sign that she's destined
Good
to do
omen.
big
Yeah.
things. Um, and that's I begin the book with this episode because I think it's a uh, well, it's excellent foreshadowing for what happens with her life. And it does go on to become a kind of important and legendary story. So I don't think I begin in Kashmir because other people have written uh, sort of conspiratorial things disputing this. I don't know that I want to give any credence to those kinds of things. There's no legitimacy to some of that kind of stuff. It's one thing if people wanted to criticize, policy decisions or choices that are made. I mean and that's everyone is entitled to do those things. But disputing some of this other stuff is just silly, and so I don't feel like legitimizing that.
So, Vijay Lakshmi Pandit campaigned against her niece Indira Gandhi, who was the prime minister during emergency because she felt that it was non-democratic. And Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, was also a possessive sister. After Indira Gandhi took over, Pandit said, and I quote from your book, that Nehru's Congress party is no longer the home of selfless Democrats, but the refuge of self-seeking politicians. In your opinion, does her assessment of the Congress party of the 1970s still hold true?
Um, I think I think the important takeaway from um, that episode is that Vijay Lakshmi Pandit is calling on all Indians and all politicians, all political parties to uphold the values um, on which the country achieved independence, through which the country achieved independence from Great Britain in 1947. And those values, which ultimately were shepherded through by Dr. Ambedkar into the Indian Constitution and were embodied in that document, and also were championed by a wide array of figures who stood against the colonial uh, control of the subcontinent, um, helped to define India as a free, independent, democratic space. And there was a call for everyone to be selfless and committed to transparency and integrity and basic values of freedom and justice for all its citizens. So I would say that she not only criticized the Congress Party in the 70s, she continued to criticize all those in power until the last days of her life. And she maintained very good personal relations with her family. And in fact, she tried to have good relations even with Indira Gandhi,
Your
though she had
research, so
challenged her.
yeah, sorry,
So,
sorry.
sorry. So I would say she separated out the personal from the political. It wasn't about making personal criticisms. It was about making a political point. And the point was that through the 1980s, through the end of her life, she was critical of the Congress because it was the party in power. So I would say that the call is to everyone who holds and everyone who seeks power. Look, the goal here is to help uplift all the people in the country and to do right by them and to do right in the world. That's the call. That was the call, a motivating call of the movement in general as she saw it. And that's what she called on people to live by. And so I would say that the lesson here today is that it holds true for everyone.
During her time as president of the UNGA, she sailed through many crises. So, for our viewers, can you tell us the most challenging crisis she faced during her time at the UN?
Sorry, just to clarify, do you mean when she was president or in
Yeah,
all of
when
the
she
time
was a
she was
president.
when she was the president?
Yeah.
Well, when she's the president, there's this ongoing conflict in Korea, the Korean War. I would say that's the dominating issue of that day. And now, as the UNGA president, she has to oversee and sit somewhat above the fray, but she also has to help facilitate resolution of it. So she had some plans in order to be able to facilitate that, but the period in which she actually sees the Open General Assembly ends, it doesn't get called back. So she doesn't oversee that in her position as president. But it is India, and it's Krishna Men who helps to negotiate
Yeah.
the end to that and the armistice, which holds through to today. So I would say that's the biggest crisis of her period as president of the UNGA. But the biggest achievement at the UN, which I would differentiate of all the things that she did, is unquestionably her challenge to South Africa in 1946.
Pandit was also a mother, and during her time in jail and while working for the freedom movement, she would always think about her children and the dread that they might forget her. After her husband died, she bore the responsibility not just of her family, but also of the nation. While you have beautifully narrated this anxiety and dilemma, this sentiment is common among working women even in today's India. So I was very intrigued to know that how were you able to gather such anecdotes from her personal life? And how difficult and challenging was this for you?
Well, I was lucky to have access to letters that she had written to her children, particularly to Nayantara. And there's a whole giant set of those letters that I had. But there are also some letters that Rita wrote or that Chandralekha wrote, or that she in turn wrote to Rita. So all of that is part of this archive of material that I had access to. And that obviously told me quite a bit. I also had letters with Ranjit, for example, and there are other things as well, but these are the sort of inside look at the family relations and the ways in which she was interacting with them. In addition, Chandralekha wrote a book, and Nayantara also wrote 2 memoirs. And so I was able to use some of that published material. And of course, Nayanthara Sahgal is a well-known writer, and people have talked about her life from a variety of angles, and that has brought additional insight. So drawing on all of that material collectively, I was able to pull these anecdotes together. I might also add, of course, that the family in general was extremely generous with me, and just answered question after question after question after question as it was coming up. So I had kind of additional layers of material to add on to the written record. And they were always very clear. They never saw anything that I wrote until it was finished. I never asked to see it. And they were also unfailingly encouraging that I should be as fully open and transparent as possible. Their phrase was to speak of her warts and all. And that's what I did.
And you took, I guess, 8 years. It took 8 years of research to write this book. Like, that is like huge. 8 years of research. Was there a time when you felt, oh, I'm not able to do it now? It's taking a lot of time, or you lost the motivation in between? Was there any such moment while researching on the book?
I think that what you describe is the ebb and flow of all writing. All writers, I think, face moments of self-doubt or exhaustion, or the terror of the blank page. Like, how does this feel? And some days are easier than others. Sometimes I would sit down to write, and it would take me hours to write one sentence. That's all that would manage to come out. And then other days, a few pages might flow very easily. Obviously, part of the 8 years that you just described involved the lockdown of COVID. And initially I thought, well, here I'm at home. This will make this, I have all more time. But then, as everyone, I'm sure everyone everywhere understands, after just a few weeks or months of this lockdown, it became, you sort of had this heaviness in your head from just sitting in the house all the time. It became hard to maintain motivation. Also, obviously, I stopped having access to all of the libraries and all of the material, so that slowed things down a little bit. So yeah, all of those things happen. I think it's a natural part of writing. I think the important thing for writers, any writer, to understand, and I have to remind myself of this, is that it's a very natural part of the process. As you come to these challenging moments, sometimes the thoughts aren't completely formed, and you have to sit with it for a while. You have to turn away, you have to read something else, or you have to just relax, watch some TV or something. And then it will, your mind is working on it subconsciously sometimes, or sometimes you have to actively think about it and then come back to it. So it's all a natural part of the process. You shouldn't fear it. And eventually it'll keep going, as long as you stick with it. I never felt I wanted to stop. I just felt at points that it was a big task. It was bigger than anything I'd ever tried to do.
But it is really a deeply researched and well-written book, sir. Thank you for this. What I found intriguing in your book was that you have very honestly written that Vijaya Lakshmi Pandit was exceptionally privileged. And the extraordinary, and I quote, the extraordinary was ordinary for her. And when she was a child, she had the privilege to meet personalities like Annie Besant, Sarojini Naidu. What would you say about this privilege, in the sense that had it been somebody else at her place, at Vijay Lakshmi's place, who was not equally privileged, how difficult would it have been for that person to achieve what Pandit achieved in her life?
I think the privilege that she had can't fully be separated from what she accomplished. It's part of this. It's part of the history and the narrative. Engaging in a hypothetical is very challenging. Obviously, there are examples of people who come from less privileged backgrounds. Many people come from less privileged backgrounds than she did. But there are examples of people who came from less privileged and indeed much less privileged backgrounds who did go on to achieve um, many great things. So it's not that it's impossible to do it, but that this, uh, first of all, obviously served as an asset for her. And also in this, it is part of the context of what shapes her. That that the access that she had, the kind of constant flow of visitors, who all of whom were um, important or renowned in their fields. It wasn't just Naidu or Besant. I mean, the Saprus sort of came in and
Yeah.
out, and many different kinds of British officials came in and out of the house. All kinds of people, and obviously, once Gandhi got involved, the house becomes the epicenter of the movement. So all of the freedom stalwarts flowed in and out of her life at an early age. So I would say all of that shapes her, it gives her insight in what it means to be a very good speaker, a leader, what inspires people. She's observing, she's a sharp observer. She's observing through all of this period. Uh, I think it's also an important part of the story because it also reflects what she gives up at some point. And she's imprisoned 3 times.
Yes.
And one of those prison sentences is quite lengthy. And so she, and she's on the road quite a bit. She campaigns in a variety of circumstances, and all of this together, in addition to the fact that they, sort of give up the house, and she gives up a lot of her resources in a particular period of time during the anti-colonial struggle. I think that is also a reflection of her commitment to the bigger cause, and what she's, it informs the choices that she makes. The other thing about this, the importance of the background is, she what's also important to recognize is that she loses even more after Ranjit Pandit dies.
That is.
Everything that they had built together as a family, plus everything that she herself owned or inherited, all of that is lost after her husband dies in a dispute with his family, and his brother Pratap takes it all, and she's left essentially penniless. And so, her brother offers to support her and all of that. But at the end of the day, from that point forward, the money that she has is always from whatever she earns, and works for. And it's a understanding the background that she had early in her life is really significant in understanding that particular moment, what she goes through, and the burden of that as a cost to her own children, and then as a motivation for what she does thereafter.
So my last question to you is that had Vijay Lakshmi Pandit been alive today, what would she say about today's India?
Well, I think Vijay Lakshmi Pandit would call, first of all, I think she would be appalled by the easy way in which people transmit misinformation and disinformation. That would go against her commitment to the truth. And she was unfailingly committed to the truth her whole life as she saw it, and she would always speak her mind freely. She, secondly, would remind people of the importance of speaking freely and being able to express one's opinions across all matters. This is fundamental to a democracy. She stood for these values in her day, but most importantly, she challenged Indira Gandhi on this basis, on this very basis. This was the main issue, and she grew particularly upset with her niece for abandoning these principles during the emergency. And so I think she would underscore the importance of allowing everyone to have their say, and to have equal say, in a sense, and not to be afraid of speech, to make your case as forcefully as you want. I don't think she would dispute that everyone, there are going to be different political opinions, and she would also accept that sometimes other political opinions besides her own might carry the day. I've described examples where that happens, but she would insist that everyone be given the opportunity to have their say, and that they be able to fight for public opinion freely. So I think that would be an important part. And I think she would also remind us, as she did in her day, of the importance of recognizing and celebrating all of the differences we have amongst ourselves that make us that sort of make us this kaleidoscopic variety is what makes everything so special and interesting and unique. And I think she would call on us to remember that, and to celebrate it as much as possible. And so on all those grounds, I think she would also ask every person to disavow attempts to seek harm against not only our people who are our friends and neighbors, but all citizens of India, as well as non-citizens in India and people throughout the world. So I think those are her primary messages that I think she pushed in her day and would hope that we would embrace again in ours.
Thank you for speaking to me, sir. And thanks for writing such an excellent and nice book. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.